Good morning, everybody. I think we'll get started. It's just at 10, so let's get going. You're with me for about an hour and a half, so we have lots to cover. But that doesn't mean that I don't want you to raise your hand if you have a question, so feel free. My name's Helen Cadigan Mazel, and I am currently the Director of Development and Research here at Perkins School for the Blind in the CVI Center. And I am a TVI, teacher of students with visual impairments, and a deafblind specialist. So today what we're going to do is cover the visual behaviors of CVI, and then some of the ways that you can support your child at home, and also think about advocating for your child in a school environment. So one of the things that we know is that CVI, because it's a visual issue, is going to impact absolutely every part of children's development and every part of their learning. So we want to understand how these CVI behaviors impact the child and how to support that with access, because that's the important piece we have here, is access to learning. We want to make sure that we create environments and materials that match how that child sees the visual world. So we know that this learning is going to begin with access. And vision is one piece of the puzzle, and we cannot forget the compensatory skills that children use in order to understand what they see. So children that you show something to and they want to hold it because they need that tactile information as well to confirm, yes, that's what I'm seeing. And so much of school is sitting away from materials and only being shown materials. So we really, really want to support these compensatory skills and allow children to use these compensatory skills as much as possible. And we'll cover what those are. And we're going to go in thinking about compensatory skills sort of beyond the idea of just hearing and smell and touch and taste into some of the other ways that children with CVI or parents of children with CVI have told us that their children compensate for their vision loss, because every single child figures out some way to help themselves, no matter who they are, to figure out their world. And we know that that's all part of learning as well. So I just want to talk about some of the myths that are in CVI right now, and just to clarify some of them. These are, in fact, some misconceptions that I once had around cortical cerebral visual impairment. And here at Perkins, we do use that term, cortical cerebral visual impairment, because there is no line between one and another. We're talking about a brain-based visual impairment. So all the research right now that's coming out is really using the word cerebral. And they'll put cortical in parentheses because cortical was an older word. So just know that these are both brain-based visual impairments. There's no difference between those two things. I want to get away from the idea that somehow children have mild CVI. Children who are looking at things, but they don't understand their parents' faces, they don't understand a highly symbolic worksheet, or they fall off curbs, they hardly have a mild visual impairment. We want to make sure that we get away from this idea that some children have a mild visual impairment. It's not mild, it's theirs. We need to deal with what their issues are, their access to learning. I think in the beginning I thought there were, because I was using an assessment tool that identified 10 areas. We know now that there are many, many, many more than 10 areas that we want to look at when we think about CVI, and we'll go over all those. We also want to get away from this idea, because a child has CVI, they all need to have the same thing in the classroom. That's not true. They need materials, and in the home, they need materials matched to their very, very unique kind of visual loss. So I want to get away from that idea. And sometimes the internet is a little bit of the Wild West around this topic. All kids with CVI need X. Really try and stay away from that idea. All children with CVI do not necessarily have evidence of a brain injury. So sometimes children will go to the doctor, they'll get an MRI that looks completely clean, and even a doctor might say, well, they can't have CVI because they don't have any evidence of brain injury. We do know that children with migration issues of the brain or metabolic issues of the brain, children with Down syndrome, all of these children don't necessarily have an MRI that shows any problem, yet they still have CVI. Brain imaging is not as good as we think it is, right? It's just not as good as we think it is. Another example is if a child had autism, they can't take a brain scan of a child with autism and say, there's the autism right there. They can't do that. We don't have that technology yet. So just get away from that idea, even if you hear it from a physician. That's just not true. We also used to think that children with CVI were so very, very different that they were completely different than children with ocular impairments. And that's not true. Visual impairment is visual impairment is visual impairment. We want to identify what the visual impairments are for all kids who have vision loss. And we want to put supports in place for all kids who have vision loss in the home or in the school environment. They have a lot of shared needs. So we do know that kids with ocular problems might have a difficult time seeing those flowers on the table over there because their acuity is not very good. That's their problem. They can't access things at distance. But we also know that children with CVI, because of all the clutter in this room, may not be able to see those flowers on that table. Neither child has access, and we have to create access. So there's lots of shared needs when we think about programming for kids. The rate and extent of improvement for kids with CVI is not predictable at all. Some children will just scoot ahead and they seem to improve their vision very quickly. Other children are on a slower path. It really has to do, if you think about it, it has to do with your memories, it has to do with cognition, it has to do with language ability. All those things come together to allow a child to see their world better and understand their world better. So the rate of improvement is not standardized for any child. But we do know this visual neuroplasticity. We do know that children can improve when we give them access. But if I have a child that I do an observation for in a classroom, and then I take them into my highly adapted CVI assessment center, and they see so much better, did they improve on the walk over? No. I created access with my assessment center in order for them to show me their best visual skills. I know that, and then I want to embed that back in the classroom or back in the home. One other misconception is that Braille is not appropriate for kids with CVI. That is a big misconception. I really encourage you to look up CVI Perspective. It's done by a person who has CVI, and they talk about how much they really wish that they had Braille because they can't read all day long. They struggled in college because they visually could not read. That Braille gave them access across the day to materials. So they were able to go to college with this dual media. They learned print and they learned Braille. So that's something that's determined by your TVI with something called a learning media assessment. And often children with CVI, it will be recommended that they are dual media learners just because they cannot access 20 pages of print. They may be able to read a typical book, but after 4 pages, they're done. Does that mean that they can't read anymore? How else can we give them access? Again, access to learning. There's a lot around reading. I just shared this with somebody this morning. A lot of times, kids with CVI, they'll say, oh, just do this for their literacy. Just do word bubbling for their literacy. That does not match the science of reading. And so I encourage you to look at this webinar. It's called Soul to Story. And it really talks about what the science of reading is. Just showing kids words does not teach them to read. It has to be a systematic phonics-based reading program. And if your child is learning to read, whether they have CVI or not, you need to follow the reading science. That is just by showing kids words does not ensure access. Whoops. When we think about CVI, we were really listening, and I think that for me, it's very, very true that every single time I did an assessment, a parent taught me something more about how a child's brain can be impacted, or the child taught me something more about how the brain can be impacted. And I think that this is true whether the child had typical language skills or not, that their behavior really could tell me a whole lot about what they could see, what they couldn't see, what they could do, what they couldn't do. So we always make sure that we list parents and the child themselves as partners in our assessment, because they really are. It's no mistake that every single assessment tool used right now in the world of CVI is based heavily on parent information. Parents see their child from the moment of birth till the age that you meet them. There's a lifetime of information there. They see that child over multiple environments that we don't get to see. We see them in a school environment, perhaps, but they see them at grandma's house, they see them in the mall, they see them at Chuck E. Cheese. They see them in multiple places, and they have that vast understanding of how that child's going to react in those different environments. And they also have the across the day understanding. They know how their child sees at 7 o'clock in the morning versus 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And some parents can identify an actual time and say, you know what, by 3 o'clock my child's done. Does that mean that we stop teaching them after 3 o'clock? No, it means that we need to switch this compensatory skill learning. We have to be able to do that. So Perkins began to think more and more about all we were learning and all we were hearing from parents and students and adults with CVI who are coming forward in a big way to help us understand how CVI impacts many, many kinds of people. So what we've developed is these 16 visual behaviors, which we'll go over today, and they're umbrella categories for things that can happen to the visual brain. We currently have 16 because these are the 16 areas that we understand right now. There could be a 17th, there could be an 18th someday. The understanding of CVI is evolving, and we have to keep up with it. Right now, everything is fitting very nicely into these 16 visual behaviors. And we have to identify these new needs around CVI, as I said, these compensatory skills that are such a great support for children's understanding of the visual information. Another example of that is that children will look at a person, but they don't want to greet them until that person talks. So the auditory information supports, yep, that is my mom, or yep, that is my teacher. See, that's the compensatory skill confirms that what they're seeing. And so in this development of these 16 visual behaviors, we are creating an assessment tool that's called the Perkins Protocol. And I'll talk just a little bit about it. It's probably going to be out at the end of the year. This will be an online tool that will walk a teacher of students with visual impairments through the assessment process in partnership with the parent and create a really good assessment around that particular child. Unique to that child, that's really one of our core beliefs, is that we have to have a unique assessment for that child and consider everything about that child. Because we know that CVI is often one part of a very complex child. You know, very, very often we do not meet CVI as just CVI. There's other confounding issues because the brain is the brain is the brain. So we need this broader understanding of CVI because we want to do a better assessment, and our better assessment is going to create this better educational programming. So we have to look at tools that are more than vision. We have to get away from this idea that I'm doing everything because I'm going to improve this child's vision. We want to think of I'm going to do everything to improve that child's access to learning. Again, we're not going to wait until vision gets to a certain point that the child can begin to learn visually. We want everything brought to that child so that they're learning. And if we create the right environments matched to their vision, give them the right materials matched to their vision so they can learn, their visual attention will improve and their visual recognition will improve. And those are the two core pieces we look at in assessment. What's the visual attention? How well are they looking? And what's the visual recognition? Now that they're looking, can they understand what they're seeing? This is not something I thought about when I first came into the world of CVI. I thought I was just trying to get kids to look at things. And once they looked, I thought, okay, you know, I'm kind of done now. I never considered the recognition piece, and this becomes so, so important for us to remember. Recognition means the child's learning, right? So we want to make sure that we consider is the assessment being done on my child considering their recognition piece, not just their ability to look at something. We also want, in the protocol, we really wanted research to be the basis of everything that we thought about. So we worked with this educational development company called EdCount. And what they did was, we came up with parent questions within our protocol, and they said, I want to see research about every single concept that you're talking about in that question, or you can't use that question. So we had to really dig in and find all this research to support the fact that that question really was appropriate for a child and a family who had CVI. So that really, really is important, that research is the basis of what we're doing. And we also know, again, that children with CVI need educational programming, again, just like some of the needs of their children who have ocular impairments, whether it's Braille, whether it's exploration of the environment, whether it's orientation and mobility skills. Any of those skills can be a crossover for someone with an ocular impairment. We've just listened and learned, as I said, so much from adults and parents and children who have CVI. And we really need to engage the child in assessment. We have to tap into this parent knowledge. We have to seek not only the parent's knowledge, but the classroom teacher's knowledge, the related service provider's knowledge, in order to, because they know them better than we do as a TVI who comes in less regularly than a speech and language person. And this medical information, we have to seek this medical information. When I first entered the field, most people had ocular impairments. We didn't really have CVI on our radar. I've been in the field for 45 years. And I used to ask the doctor for the medical information. I would take the information. I knew what all that meant, and I did my assessment and created program planning. Right now, the doctors don't understand CVI because they can't test it in the office. So they're looking to people like the vision professionals to do a functional vision assessment to make sure that they understand how the child's functioning in the world. Then they can give a diagnosis of CVI. So many of you may have been frustrated trying to get a diagnosis from a doctor. They don't have any tools right now. So really, really creating this partnership with a doctor around what the child's function is in the world is going to be extremely important, making relationships between your vision professional and the doctor. And this will be part of the protocol, will actually be a generated doctor's letter for this reason. We also know that, that the shared information about compensatory skills and how the child is functioning in the world needs to be shared back with the medical professional. Again, we want them to understand CVI better in order for them to create some tools that they might use in the office to understand CVI. Dr. Haidari, who's at Boston Children's Hospital, I don't know if any of you see Dr. Haidari, she's doing some work where VEPs, visually evoked potentials, and the teller cards, which are striped cards you may have seen, it seems as if the correlation in those two measurements is kind of unique for kids with CVI. So there is some work being done. The doctors are doing some work to try to figure out clinically with some real strong research what kinds of tools they can use in the office, but that one's still sort of in development. We also know that using the protocol, we get an assessment is one moment in time, and that we have to do ongoing assessment. So I get to work with Amelia, who's in the group, and we've worked sometimes a speech and language therapist. I'm not going to get everything that I need to know about the visual access to speech and language on a device, on a communication device, in a one-shot deal, even if Amelia joined me for the 2-hour assessment. We have to partner together in an ongoing basis to share that knowledge about the recognition of those items on the communication system, or whether or not that child is color coding the parts of that communication system, or whether that child is just memorizing the location of that. That's going to be part of any assessment, is this ongoing assessment. It's also important when you think about a child who I might do an assessment on a Thursday, but maybe the following Wednesday they were really tired. In that moment, I have to be able to assess that and then program plan for a non-visual activity perhaps. Behavior is communication. Our little ones who are too young to say, I can't see that, or I don't understand what you're showing me, or I'm very confused, or this place is scary. Little ones will struggle with that, and children with non-traditional language will struggle with that. The only way they can communicate with us about their difficulties with their vision is through their behavior. So trying to always see children's behavior in light of the process of CVI. So if a child is struggling and has a complete meltdown in a very busy place, to be able to look around and say, oh, this is a really busy place, there's random motion here, this is not matching what their visual skills need. So again, thinking of communication and behavior as communication is very, very important. And we do know that each child develops these strategies, these survival skills to understand CVI. Oops, sorry. So some of our survival skills that kids have is using their visual skills. They can also use their compensatory skills, and that's hearing and smell and touch and taste, all those ideas. But they also have memory, that children rely on memory. So some children want to keep things in the same place. They want predictable things to happen all the time, because in fact they see it better, they understand what it is better if it's in a predictable place for them. If it's not in their predictable place, they don't have good search patterns to find things because of their poor visual recognition. So children will also often try to put things back in these predictable places or look there first when they're searching for something. So this becomes very, very important for us. And we do it as well. If I'm in my home, I woke up this morning at home, and I got ready to come here today without using very much of my visual energy, because all my materials, all my clothes, all my makeup, all my showering materials were all in very, very predictable places. You know, I get up and I do the same thing every single morning. Put the coffee on at the same time every single morning. Last week, I was at a conference in Pennsylvania, and when I got up in the morning, nothing's where I wanted to be in that hotel room. I have to kick up and use a lot more visual energy in that environment. And again, that's what a kid with CVI is having to do all the time, is kick up that visual energy constantly, creating huge fatigue, as you might imagine. And no wonder kids are out of gas. Shape coding and color coding. I think that that's often what kids will do. If something is the same shape or something is the same color, that can often confuse us. And we say, oh yeah, they know what that object is. But in fact, what they're doing is color coding or shape coding. So maybe they run up to the wrong man who's the same height as their dad. Or they run up to a man because he has a beard, but it's not really their dad who has a beard. Or they run up to somebody who the dad wears jeans all the time, so they run up to the other person who has jeans. Those would be examples of color coding and shape coding. I did an assessment of a child from our lower school, and she really liked this little pink toy. She could find this thing anywhere. And so when I asked the teacher, you know, what things do they recognize, or I asked the parent, what things do they recognize? I said, oh yeah, she absolutely knows her pink toy. She loves that pink toy. And in fact, I could put it with multiple things and that child could find it. I could put it across the room and that child would find it. And so then I said, let me fool with the color a little bit. So I put it with a bunch of, like, maybe 5 other pink things. She no longer could find it. I put it across the room, but I put other pink things across the room. She no longer could find it. She kept going up to the other pink things in the room. So again, color seems to be something that kids do a lot. Parents will talk about, you know, they'll grab the wrong backpack or grab the wrong water bottle because they think it's theirs by color. We have a family that we work with at Perkins who all the kids have red hair, and the parent says, I know he doesn't know which brother is which, because he can shape code his sister because she's got the long red hair, but the brothers who all have short red hair, the sibling cannot tell them apart because the color coding is really not effective there. And then self-talk and narration. A lot of kids will talk themselves through this visual information, and it's that auditory processing that they're trying to use when they think about CVI. And the other part is context. So I might say to a parent, do you think your child knows who you are? Oh, absolutely. They know who I am. But what about when you appear in a place you're not supposed to be? Like if you came to school and you didn't talk, would they still know who you are? Or does the context of I know mom always is in my house and she's that blonde person, then I recognize her again by those other compensatory skills. Is it the context that helps them? Can the child recognize their spoon only in a snack situation where their bib is on, they're smelling the food, and then they recognize the spoon? But what if I showed them that spoon in physical therapy where there is no food, there is no bib, there is no smell? Can they still recognize it there? And that's where we see kids falling down. So we try to have to really not let kids fool us that they're visually recognizing things. That's not a problem I'm telling you about for the kid. It's for us as far as planning, and it's for us as far as making sure that we're not fooled into giving them the wrong things because we think that they're recognizing more than they are. So we really try to tease this out in assessment as much as we can. Looking at something does not mean you understand what you're looking at. Again, visual attention, visual recognition are our core pieces of assessment. So I've given everybody on the table, you have a card, and I like to hand this card out at IEPs. This card is easily accessible for you. You can each one of you can look at that card. You see every teeny black line. You see every shape. You see every color. What is it? So you have visual attention right now. You're perfectly attending to this image, but you have no visual recognition. So think about a child. I love this because this is what children struggle with. You hand them that learning material in school and they don't know what they're looking at. So what about if I gave you all this card, this image, and then I gave you a test about it? Would any of you do well on a test about what this was? Would that begin to look to a team like you had a cognitive problem, where in fact you have a visual access problem? So this is this is a really good card. I like to pass these out at IEPs as much as I can because the school teams are the general public. If you say visual impairment, they think the child sees nothing, has a dog and a cane. That's their limited idea. They're the general public about visual impairment. You may all, as parents, have been the general public before you had your own child and understand the intricacies of visual problems. And so this is just a really helpful simulation of what a child with CVI might be really struggling with. So when we created this protocol, we had this, we dug into all the work that's currently been done around CVI, and you can see that we did Gordon Dutton's visual skills inventory, the Teach CVI screenings, the Christine Roman CVI range, the Previs, the visual assessment questionnaire, Nicola McDowell's Austin assessment, Matt Tejan's image assessment, and the APH complexity cards. These are all the tools that are out there currently that evaluate cortical cerebral visual impairment. And so we wanted to make sure that we included everything that they were talking about because that's part of CVI as they understand it, and then try to bring it all together into the protocol that we've created. And these have been some of our partners here. Dr. Lotfi Marabet, he's at the Lab of Visual Neuroplasticity at Harvard, doing a lot of work around CVI. Corinna Bauer, Barry Cran, Gina Haidari. This is an optometrist, ophthalmologist, Gordon Dutton. So anyway, you'll get access to this PowerPoint if you want to have it. So all these names are listed, but these have been all our partners so far. And again, really focusing on what the research is around CVI right now. We do know that kids with CVI all have ocular problems too, and they seem to have the same kinds of ocular problems. They have refractive errors. Many of them need glasses, and we want them to have glasses if they need glasses because we want the clearest image getting back to that visual brain. It's like the starting place. So if you ask that doctor about glasses, unfortunately, sometimes doctors will say, well, I'm not sure they'll help. They make a judgment call based on the age of the child or maybe the abilities of the child that glasses won't really help because maybe the child's not going to be reading. They still need access to the world. So really push that a little bit and make sure that if your child needs glasses, they absolutely have glasses. I mean, if I took my glasses off right now, I would be visually impaired and I would not be getting the correct information in my visual brain. Strabismus, eye turns, everybody sees, most people have that issue when we have CVI. Amblyopia, so if your left, let me see, this is, my left eye was turning out, my brain is going to learn to use my best eye, and this eye will actually tune off. My brain will shut down this eye. It's called amblyopia. We want to make sure we address the strabismus and the amblyopia before the age of 10, because if you go past the age of 10, then that child's vision really is not going to be happening on that left side at all. The brain is just going to tune it off. Ocular motor problems, that's how your eyes are moving together. Optic nerve abnormalities, you may see that in the eye report from your doctor. Nystagmus, this like light shaking of the eyes, or low contrast sensitivities. That means that they really need, if I show them something white, I want it to be against a black background. If I show them something black, I want it against a white background. It's the difference between what you want the child to look at and what the background color is. So here are our visual behaviors that we've come up with. I won't read each one because we're going to go through each one separately, but you see at the bottom, the core piece is that compensatory skills. So number one, the first thing we look at is appearance of the eye. And we just want to look at the eye, see what that eye alignment is, and that can be confirmed by the doctor's office. But many children with CVI have alternating use. You'll see that in your child's eye report, which means they kind of do this. There, it switches. It's not one eye is always out. Maybe one's out more often than the other, but you get this shift. We want to be able to take a look at that and figure out when and how kids use their different eyes. So just worked with a child recently who would scan the environment with her left eye, but when she wanted to look closely at it, she looked at it with her right eye. So that would be an example of what we wanted to know. And can they use these two eyes together? So as you see, strabismus is this eye alignment, and you can have strabismus for two different reasons. One is the muscles of the eyes are weak, so one drifts off. So what they do is they do surgery and they pull that over, and that's a muscle problem. Or it can be brain-based, which is most often what we have with kids with CVI. So here's a picture of my grandniece, and the way that the doctor really understands strabismus is they look at the child's eyes. Do you see in her eyes the reflection of the light is happening in exactly the same place in both eyes? That's one of the things they look at, because that shows true eye alignment. And here's the different kinds. We have exotropia, which means out. We have esotropia, which means in. We have hyperopia, which means one eye points up. And we have hypotropia, which means one eye goes down. So when we see kids like this, it's going to, I obviously will be able to see that when we look at the child, but you might see the child do some head tilting. They might do body tilting. They might sit sideways. So you tell them to sit up to the kitchen table and they want to sit like this because that's how they're adjusting for their own eye alignment. And what do all us adults want the child to do? Sit, come on, let's turn around, sit up at the table. If your child is doing that, let them do it. Let them do it in the home. They're accessing their best visual fields that way. I see it in schools. I've done it myself before I understood this. Come on, put your feet under the table. But really kind of respect this idea around strabismus or visual fields. Crossing or squinting one eye is something you might see. Difficulty coordinating their eyes. They might lack binocular vision, which means depth perception. Again, amblyopia, or they might miss information in impacted fields. So if my left eye is pulled in like this, my visual field has shifted. Do you see that? So your visual field is where your eyes are pointing. My visual field is over here right now with my eye straight. If my eye pulls in, my visual field changes. So again, you'll see that a lot of the behaviors around that head tilting, that body tilting, that sitting sideways. So we want to allow this head positioning as much as you can. I think, again, you want the school to understand this and you want to understand themselves. You really need, that child is doing, kids know themselves. They know how they see, and they'll do these things that to us don't make any sense, but if you dig in with an assessment and really look at their strabismus or their visual fields, you'll see that they really need to do that. Use glasses consistently if that's been recommended. Encourage scanning. If my eye is tuned in and I'm not seeing over here, we have to teach that child to scan. Turn their bodies that way in order to access the whole visual field in your living room, or trying to cross the street, or going to a new environment. You might tap their shoulder. Let's look over here, because they don't think this exists. So you have to direct them. You have to make sure that they're really scanning the whole field. Giving them time, because this takes a lot of time. This is a lot of work. Vision for you and I is a breeze. We don't think about it, right? Kids are working really hard when they have visual problems, really hard. So we have to make sure that we give them extra time, and we give them breaks when they're having fatigue. And you might also have surgery recommended by your doctor, and this is something that you have to, dig into. Is this going to help my child? What might I expect? It's a very common surgery, but it's anytime your child has surgery, it's a big deal. So think about that patching and that surgery, because we do really want that eye alignment to be better. The next thing we look at is movement of the eye, and this can be ocular motor problems. This is really an assessment of how the child's eyes move. Do they move horizontally well, vertically well, in the diagonal? And what's the quality of that shifting? So if I show them two things, do they smoothly go between each one? Do they look at one, blink, and then have to look at the other? Do they look at one, go around and around and around before they can find that? What's the quality of that shift of gaze? Again, think of the fatigue. If it's not nice and smooth like you and I can do, we want to really make sure that we give them that extra time. We want to look at scanning. If I show them a really long thing, do they scan the whole elements of all that thing? And I'll show you an image in a minute. And then, can they follow objects of different speeds? How fast can something be traveling for them to see it in midair? Can they follow a ball in midair? Or do they follow it better when it's on a predictable path like the floor? This is going to impact any kinds of, again, access to learning. So strabismus can definitely impact the shift of gaze. Nystagmus can. Kids can have inconsistent fixation where they're not locking onto this and not locking onto this. It's more directed by movement. So it can look like their eyes are roving around rather than really shifting smoothly and well. And the student, again, might use head postures and head movements to compensate for this issue. And we should allow those compensations to be in place. This was some work that was done by a researcher way back in 1967, and this was looking at eye gaze. So the picture that you see up in the corner is a very old-fashioned picture, and it's a man coming through a door. It looks like a maid might be holding the door for him, and this woman is getting up to greet him, and then there's a little kid sitting at the table. So if I show this picture to any of you, first of all, is this a current day picture? No. Think of the vast amount of visual information that you have in your head that allowed you to think about whether this was current times or in the past. Recently, this little boy who has CVI was doing a paper about Helen Keller. He told me everything about Helen Keller. He went on websites and he looked at, he read the materials about her, but he didn't have access to the pictures. And so when I said to him, well, when was Helen Keller born? And he was like, I don't know where she lives. He didn't, even though everyone else in his class, in his first grade class, knew because of the clothes that people were wearing, knew that Helen Keller lived a long time ago without anyone telling them. But my child with CVI did not know that because they didn't have access to the pictures. This is a boy who can read print, typical size print, but he can't understand, just like you, he can't understand what's in this picture, okay? And so also, so if I show this picture, this is what your eyes do. Your eyes shift gaze to all that different parts, all the different parts to gather the information that your brain needs to process that. So what is your central vision? If you put your hand up and put your thumb out, and I want you to stare at your thumb. Your thumb is in your central gaze right now. You see how long your fingernail is, you see the little lines in your thumb, you see absolutely everything, right? What do you see that's around it right now? If you don't move your eye off that thumb, is everything else clear? No. Everything else is in your periphery. Everything else is very, 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 very hard to see, other than maybe color and vague shape. If you wanted to see something else, like that light over there, I have to shift my central gaze. I have to move my central gaze to find that. Does that make sense? So when you show a picture in an assessment, if I show a picture to a child and I don't see this shift of gaze, that image is not accessible for that child without some intervention from me, because they don't have shift of gaze. So what do I do when children don't have shift of gaze? I want to give time and extra time. I want to increase spacing. I'd certainly want to declutter those materials. So maybe I would cover up everything except that man coming through the door, or cover up everything except the maid and talk about the maid and what she was doing, like really isolate those different things. I would allow that head pointing, and I would narrate what was in the image. One of the things, if your child has traditional language, just saying, what do you see, can be so eye-opening. What do you see? And you're showing them a spider, and they say octopus. They're not really, maybe not a language problem, but a visual access problem. So we want to make sure that we always try, if the child has the ability to tell us, what do they see? We want to make sure that's our first question. What do you see here? Because what if I had a vocabulary list that had spiders and octopuses as some testing, that then had to go to the word, like the spider went to the word spider, or the octopus went to the word, and the child mixed those two things up because of vision? It would look like the child had a spelling problem or a cognitive problem, where in fact it was lack of visual access for that child. So really understanding what that child needs. And also, as I said, drawing attention to the elements by isolating them or giving a tap cue or any of those things, so that you have that shift of gaze to that. So what do we need to understand our visual world? And I think we've talked about visual attention. You actually have to look. You have to look at this card before you ever start to decipher what's on it. And we have to use that central vision, as I said, but we have to also look at it long enough. We can't take a quick glance at something. We have to look at it long enough to figure out what it is, and then we have to do that shifting to the elements, which is what we just said. So visual attention is, I think, if we could just sum it up, it's the ability to look. It's just the ability to look, and it's the ability to gather everything that's happening in that particular scene. And we know that kids with CVI sometimes ignore things and hone in on one piece because that's the only piece they see. When kids get into clutter, their visual attention can actually shrink. And so you can see how sometimes kids with CVI are diagnosed with autism because they hyperfixate on certain elements. Sometimes it's connected to that's the only thing they see in that scene, or it's something familiar in that scene, and therefore it can start to look like they have elements of autism. Not that kids can't have both. I need to be very clear about that. But sometimes we have kids that are diagnosed with autism because we have shared behaviors between autism and CVI, and people understand the autism better at this point than they do the CVI. So we want to make sure they gather the whole scene, and we want to make sure that they can do it all day long. So if they start getting, what's their visual attention later on? I love to look at kids' IEPs or reports, and if I start to see they're inattentive or they're distracted, those are red flags for me that visual attention is impacted by fatigue. So I want to go to the team and I say, tell me more about that distraction. When do you see them distracted more? Is it when there's lots of movement around? Is it later in the day? Is it when there's too much noise? Like, dig into what that team understands, because they understand, they're putting this visual attention problem of CVI in the basket of the child's not paying attention or not attending as if it's a choice. And it isn't a choice for these kids with CVI. We want to take a look at their visual search, and what's very important is in our visual search is we know not only what to attend to, but what not to attend to, right? So our brains are very good at all that because we have this very, very rich visual experience from the time we open our eyes as little babies. And in fact, a little bit before, we have this very, very rich visual information. So children with CVI can do a couple of different things when they start to build their visual attention. Is they're able to find like their own cup, and they match it to this exact same image they have. It's kind of like match, right? But then if I show them another container, like you and I can see any container that might hold water and identify it as a water bottle, but the kid with CVI cannot because they just do match. They don't say match and then I have all this information in my brain about water containers. So it can be very limited. Again, a very, very sparse visual attention, visual recognition. So it's about, and then the second part is that visual recognition piece, as I said. Think of it as building a visual library. And some of your children may have no visual library at this point. Maybe they're only recognizing things by color coding or only recognizing things because they know they're in the environment consistently, they're in a predictable place, but they're not really recognizing it. You have to have previous experience with the item in order to understand it. We did that match, as I said, but then we want to broaden that, and that's going to be the role of the TVI in your program, is how you're going to match and expand that child's idea of, yes, that is your cup, but here's all the other different kinds of cups there are in the world, and allow that child to explore them visually, tactily, whatever they need to do with it in order to understand what they see. So let's do another activity. This is going to be you're going to use your you're not going to be able to use your central gaze. So I want you all to turn your bodies so that the screen, you still see the screen, but it's in your side vision. So look away from the screen. You still see the screen, but it's in your, now I don't want you to look. I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to tell me what you see. Just shout it out. You see anything? What did someone say, orange? Anybody else? Tan? So this is a very important concept. You can turn and look now. So now you're turning to look in your central gaze. Do you feel yourself shifting to the elements of the image? Like, again, we see so easily we don't even know what we're doing. So this is just trying to help you to see what we're doing. So this is a picture of my brother-in-law opening a lobster down on the beach in Plymouth. It's a weird perspective because we're looking down. You're understanding all that because you now have visual attention using that central gaze in order to shift to the elements. You're looking long enough in order to see what it is. And you also have experience with this. If I did this in the Midwest, maybe nobody would know what this was because they don't have experience with lobsters, right? So it's, again, think about experience. So when people are adapting books for your children with CVI, make sure that the child has had experience with whatever's on that page. So an example would be, you would not want them to adapt a book about giraffes because that child does not know what giraffes are, you know? They should be reading, if you have a dog, they should be reading a story about the dog, right? It's going to be so experience-based when we think about your child with CVI understanding what's on the page. So this visual recognition piece is huge. that we have to really look at. And this is a huge piece of that ongoing assessment that I talked about before. How are they recognizing something? So I had a parent, I did an interview recently, and the mom said, I'm so confused. I took him to Boston to an appointment, and we came out of the appointment, and he said there was something 20 feet away, and he could see it, and he knew what it was. And I said, well, tell me a little bit more about that. She said, well, it was a cab, and an old woman was getting in the cab and drove away. And he could see that it was a cab, and he could see that it was an old woman. I said, that's interesting. So then I had an interview with the child, and I said, you know, when you were at the hospital the other day and you were coming out, your mom was telling me that you could see that. And he said, well, I know that cabs have a little bit of light on the top of the cab, so I knew it was a cab. And I watched the woman's shoes, and they were old people's shoes because they were white. And I could tell it was an old person by the way she was moving. So he did not visually recognize that scene. He put those pieces together using his compensatory skills around color and light and cognition. So again, dig into that, you know, that people say, oh, he could see that at that. He couldn't see it. He was putting those things together in order to understand it. He happened to be right, but I'm sure the situations he's wrong, because he misunderstands what he's seeing. So we really just want to identify objects. At Perkins, we have a shared Google Doc for kids who have CVI, and so we want to make sure on that list that we put things that are recognized. What does that child recognize? Because those can be the basis of other recognition skills, and that's a shared doc with the parents also, and that way we can really tease out whether or not those are recognized or not. So here's an example. Let's use this again. Let's use your perfect visual systems. What is that? Is that outside your experience? It's outside mine. I pulled this off of Google. I said unidentifiable object. This came up. So anybody know what it is? Scissors. Okay, excellent. Why did you say it was scissors? Because in your visual memory, you have scissor-ness. And scissor-ness is two little places to put your fingers, right? Okay, what else, other elements? It's a candle snuffer. We have a colonial person in the room. So you can look at this and begin to visually attack it because you have a huge recognition system, a huge visual library in your head. So you don't have to know what this is, but you can tell me it's a tool. You can tell me it's a tool. You can tell me it looks like scissors. You can tell me that it opens and closes because you understand joints. You have all the joints you've ever seen in your life there. You have no idea what this is. Maybe it's a toaster, but that doesn't fit. That doesn't fit with what I need, so I'm going to discard that cognitively. But I can make a comment about that. That's got to poke something, right? So even though you don't know what this is, you still can start to visually attack this. And this is not what our children with CVI can do. So we want to make sure that we're very, very careful in building those visual recognition abilities, allowing conversation about this, allowing experience with this, allowing this child to take this candle snuffer and snuff out a candle so that there's an experience behind this to begin to build this recognition. This is the other thing when we think of broadening. I did this with my, she was about 3-year-old grandniece, and I said, what do you see here? And my grandniece could say, well, there's a duck, and 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 there's a duck. But if you look at these images, they're very different from one another. Very, very different. Kids could think this is the only kind of duck there is. They don't know that ducks are little. They don't know that ducks are multicolored and they actually have legs. They don't know that this toy duck looks nothing like a real duck. Nothing like a real duck. Other than a little, I mean really nothing. Nothing. But we all, and my 3-year-old grandniece, knows these are elements of duckness that she has learned in her very full 3-year-old visual library to understand what this is. Now leap to just black and white, and then leap to a cartoon. I mean, Donald Duck does not look like a duck, nor does he move like a duck. And a black and white is even harder for kids. This is the place we need intervention. We have to take kids from, yep, that's one kind of duck we know, but here's how they look when they're little, here's what they eat, here's what they move, here's where they live. That's the intervention that needs to come from you guys, needs to come from the school. That digging deep, okay, you're not gonna have access to this, let me dig in and let me tell you everything else there is about this particular thing. Even something as simple as a banana. If you always serve your child a cut up banana in a bowl, that's it. That's the visual memory that's in that child's head around banana-ness. Whereas if you have a child with typical vision, without you even telling them, they've seen the bananas in full form, they've seen them in bunches, they've seen them at the supermarket, they've seen them in the lunch boxes, they've seen them mashed up, they've seen you use them in cooking. Your child with CVI does not know that. You have to broaden that. You have to give them the experience with that banana in its full form. Maybe cut it up with them or cut it up at near for them to give them this, again, this much fuller visual memory. This is the intervention that we really think about. And I also want to say, and I have this at the last slide, your lives are busy. And I can remember giving people, parents advice about what they should do with their kids. And then I had kids. And I would get in bed at night and think, oh God, I didn't do that today. I didn't get any of that done today. So any of the things we talk about today, take a piece of it. Just take a piece of it. Don't feel the pressure of having to do it all. Take a piece, and just even a piece will really, really help. So when we dig into visual recognition, this would be the job of your TVI. We want to understand what they recognize visually. We want to understand what circumstances they recognize it. So can they recognize, again, mom in the home, but then when mom picks them up in school and is standing in a crowd of 12 people, no longer can find mom? We want to understand the circumstances. We want to understand if they're generalizable. What distance? What's their curiosity? What's their recognition? Do they demonstrate these visual attack skills that you just did with the candle snuffer? Can they do that? Can you do that with them? Can you visually attack something like that with them to help them build those skills that you build so naturally and so easily that they just really can't figure out how to do that? What other senses are they using? Like that boy, understanding motion and understanding color to figure out that that was an old lady getting into the cab 20 feet away. I want to make sure that we really dig and figure out whether or not this visual recognition is purely visual or is it really supported by this compensatory skills. All of us can do it purely visually, and many times in school you're being asked to do it purely visually. So we really want to make sure exactly what we know about a kid's visual system. Impact of clutter. Clutter is something that does not go away for kids with CVI. They may tolerate clutter for a certain length of time, but it's hugely exhausting for them. So supports around clutter in your home are going to be very, very important. If you've got a really patterned couch, throw a white sheet over it when the child's facing that way. At Perkins, we have what we call the two-wall challenge, where we look at a classroom. A classroom can't be totally decluttered, but can a corner of the room be decluttered so that we can face the child with CVI there when we're asking them to learn? And the same in a school system. There is no, including mine, no teacher's desk that you can be uncluttered. They don't have time to keep it neat. I'm just telling you that right now. But can you face them with their back to that clutter? Can you create two adjoining walls in that classroom to allow that child to be positioned in such a way that clutter is not an issue for them? Spacing really matters for kids. So if you have a pile of things, they can't figure it out, but they might space them in order to figure out. How many of your children will go to a toy box and just throw everything out of the toy box? Just throw, right? That throwing may be an attempt to declutter and figure out what one thing they want to find. They can't look in it and say, oh, there's my blue truck, and get it. They have to clear that clutter away. It looks like a behavior, but it's a 2-year-old or 3-year-old strategy to declutter, or moving things off the table, tossing things away. Could be what we call a behavior, but is it a behavior around clutter? And spacing makes a big, big difference. It really matters for kids with clutter whether or not it's predictable or not. So if I line things up for a kid, they can scan it in a more effective way than if it's just a jumble on their desk. And again, think about compensatory skills. If a child with CVI is asked to count some little items on their desk and you've piled it up, they may start to miscount or count things twice because they cannot map and understand the clutter of all that. But if you line them up or put them in a grid or have them, when they're counting, drop it into a metal bowl to hear the ding, that they'll get that one-to-one correspondence, which it looks like they can't develop cognitively, where in fact, again, it's a visual access issue. We want to really make sure that we tease out. I'm not saying kids with CVI don't sometimes have cognitive issues, that's not what I'm saying, but tease the visual piece out of that. Make it better, you know. Kids can look like they have motor planning problems, and then when we take out the visual issues that are involved in a motor planning task, we see the kids have better skills, but they still have motor planning problems. So I'm not saying it's one or the other. I'm saying figure out which one that team should be figuring out which one of those things they are. And when we think about clutter, it's the presentation clutter, like a bunch of things on a table. It's the materials clutter, like I'm showing you a bear that's got 6 different colors on it. That's too cluttered for color. Or environmental clutter. The background's too cluttered or the room is too cluttered. Here's just a couple of examples. Here's a very cluttered classroom and the woman is trying to read a book. Again, we can focus right in on that book without any problem at all because our visual skills are so good, but a child with CVI is going to need adaptations to the background. That teacher or you as a family member should be wearing a shirt that doesn't look like mine today because you are the background. And I'm not saying that you're, actually my closet is all, like I love wearing this because I very rarely get a chance to wear this because you are the background. Think about your clothing, what you're wearing for clothes. And if you're wearing something like this, but you're going to do something with your child, just get an apron or something that can just cover that clutter as you are the background. And this is an example of a bunch of counting bears that might be given to your child. And again, they can't see all of them. They can't figure out where they are. They certainly can't count them. But if I put them in a muffin tin, one at a time in a very predictable grid, then that child has counting skills and builds math skills based on matching it to his visual system. So what do? You want to increase spacing as much as can. You want these nice clean backgrounds. You want your clothes to be your nice clean background. You want to limit the number of items in the display. So if it's too cluttered, cover some parts of the puzzle that you're working with your child on. You can do something just simply, it's having a piece of paper and covering parts of it, whatever you're showing them. And using single colored items, because we do know due to simultanagnosia that when an item you showed your child is too many colors, the surface gets broken up and they cannot see it as one object. The solid color holds it together for them. And so solid colors in learning are really, really good. This is just an example of reducing clutter, presenting a toy in this situation by itself instead of against all this stuff. And we have to many, many times stop and say to ourselves, wait a minute, is this cluttered? Because our brains work so well, we can ignore it. And we have to think about it when we work with our kids. We have to think about it. Wait a minute, is this too cluttered? Because again, we're just too good at it and we have to reevaluate. When I'm talking to a child and I show them maybe they can understand a picture of an apple like this, and then I want to talk about apples, this in a visual brain does not match this in a visual brain. It's a completely different thing for a child with CVI because there's no spacing. They're not able to shape code. Remember I said the kids will shape code? These essentially look like two different items. So if you say to them, how many do you see? I see one. How many do you see? I see one. Nope, you just got that wrong. It was a spacing issue. It was a visual processing issue. It's visual access issue. If you separated those out so that you had 3 apples that looked like this, spaced, then the child could be able to count those 3 things in an effective way. And this is if I put apples, I did this for this image, into Google, this is what comes up. You don't get this 3 apples in a row. So you have to really think about your images. This is just an example of a communication device for one of the children that we work with. Spacing is a big deal. Background clutter is a big deal. Familiarity with the items on his communication device are a big deal for him. Also, the images that are on this match his visual library. So you see many of them are photographs, not images, not icons like Mayor Johnson. That's a hugely symbolic leap for some kids with CVI. Not all kids, but some kids, and that's what would be revealed in a CVI assessment. There again would be your bears. You can do a couple of things. You can line them up and space them, or you could make them different in a color pattern, like red, yellow, green, blue, red, yellow, green, blue, to help that, again, use color to help that child with the clutter. The next area is visual fields, and that's all this information that we have in the entire scene. So you want to evaluate whether or not the child has right visual field, left visual field, top and bottom. Many children have bottom, especially have difficulties in their lower visual field, especially kids with periventricular leukomalacia in their histories. Lower limbs, any involvement in the lower limbs can also be an involvement in the lower field vision. So there's these sort of red flags when you read a report to think about. Also, kids' attention and where they pay the most attention to can give you a lot of information about visual fields. So you can also take your child to the eye doctor, and using light in a very quiet environment, that child's visual field is completely full, and they'll say, there's no visual field problems for that child. But as a TVI, when I observe that child, I literally never see them look left or never see them look right. So where's their visual attention around their visual fields? How much of the time are they using that central vision that's so important for processing pictures and processing the world versus this peripheral viewing that you all did with that lobster on the beach? Because if you're only using your peripheral vision, you're only seeing color. See how color becomes a huge support. Effective use of color becomes a huge support for us. And again, adults with CVI are telling us when they go into cluttered situations, their visual fields actually shrink. Some adults are telling us they actually go blind if it gets too busy and too loud. They go literally blind. So again, we have to listen to those adults with CVI. So what are we going to do around visual fields? We're going to think about the best visual fields. We're going to use those compensation skills for the weaker visual field. We're going to teach them to do these full scanning as much as possible of the environment. The next is color, and I think we touched on this a little bit. One of the things about these visual behaviors that we've discussed, they all interrelate. So you've seen already how color really interrelates and clutter really interrelates. Visual field interrelates with some of the others. They're frameworks that we use for assessment, but we understand how really connected they are. So children will sometimes have a preferred color. The biggest mistake I made was identifying a child's preferred color, and then I made everything in that child's world that color. And when I did that, I completely interrupted that child's ability to code by color and recognize anything by color, because everything was the same color. So I want to really make sure that people understand how much color helps with recognition. If you all leave this conference tonight and you go home to open a bottle of wine, you have a red wine opener, you're going to open that messy drawer and search by color, right? You're all going to search by color. So visual recognition by color is something we all do. We all do that. I've done an activity before where I'll say to people, like, all right, everyone stand up and find someone just like themselves. And what people do is group themselves together by hair color or skin color. Color is really important for us. So we want to understand how children react to different colors. We know that children with CVI have difficulties with contrast sensitivity. Almost 70% of the kids have difficulties with contrast sensitivity. Therefore, bright colors are going to be very important. So even if that child seems to see one color better, don't get stuck there. Use the other colors that are bright as well. So I was working with, I teach at UMass Boston in their vision studies, and this orientation mobility specialist did an evaluation, and she put on all the landmarks she wanted the child to go to, she put a red shiny marker. And he could locate each door. And I said, well, can he get where you want him to go? And she said, no, he still can't figure that out. So I said, well, why don't you put a different color on every door, like the library has a different color and the lunchroom has a different color. And within a week, he could travel independently in his environment because he could code those items by color because they were each different. When she did all red, he couldn't figure out one from another. So again, think about color around recognition as much as you can. It's an overall strategy kids use all the time. And we want to make sure, and again, this is that simultaneous agnosia, this red color holds this bear together in the brain and says, oh, this is one thing I need to attend to. Whereas if it's this multicolor bear, am I looking at one thing or am I looking at 6 things? So think about your learning environments as much as you can. You know, even something like picking a backpack for your child, pick a bright, solid color, not like a crazy pattern, again, because you want that color to hold that together for your child. This was a situation, we had this is a code by color. We had a child in our deafblind program, and he had limited language, used sign language, and he loved frogs. So we did all our assessment was about frogs, actually, because we were trying to figure out what his visual skills were. Why not use what he likes, right? And so we showed him a bunch of frogs, and very reliable, he was like, frog, 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 as long as they were real images of frogs. When we got symbolic and started to use like cartoon images of frogs, he no longer could do it. So we know that we need to recommend to the team that they don't use symbolic images, that they use real pictures with him. And then we gave him a picture of a pink frog and a green bird, and he kept pointing to the bird because he thought all frogs were green. So again, that helped us to understand how much color coding that child was doing. In this next picture, this child was struggling to find this tube on a very complex background, and it was just, and parents do this automatically. I've asked parents, do you ever tell the child what color the item is when you want them to find it? And they're like, oh yeah, we do that all the time. So if I said to this child, the tube is pink, she could scan it and find it very, very easily, but not there. That would totally interrupt her ability to find it because, again, she's not able to visually recognize it. She's color coding a lot of the time. This was a dog toy that I was using in an assessment, and I show it to the child and I say, what is this? And the child said, I don't know, and he would feel it. He says, well, it's probably an animal because it's got 4 legs. And I said, yeah, it's an animal. He says, I don't know what it is, though. And I said, well, let's walk through it a little bit. I said, it's got this kind of pointy snout. Do you see how symbolic this is, though? It's not a realistic pig. It's a symbolic pig. He was having trouble. And so I said, well, let's turn it around. Let's feel that curly tail on the back, and this lives on a farm. Oh, he says, oh, it must be a pig, but it's not the right color, he said. So again, this information helps us understand how much children are coding by color. So what are we going to do? We want to use these colors to draw visual attention, certainly. We want to use color very, very systematically in order for the child to understand them. Even if they're color coding, that's a great skill. But we as staff and you as parents have to understand how they're color coding in order to help them figure one thing from another. We want to separate things and organize by color. So maybe everything that you need for the bath is in a pink container at the bottom of your closet. Everything you need for, some activity is in a color-coded place, a color-coded bin. Use color to help children know where am I supposed to reach to or where am I supposed to step. Where do I put my foot? Where do I put my hand? We want real items in their appropriate color. Think of that frog again. And use colors to mark locations and belongings, which I already gave you an example of. And here is children. We know that children with CVI have this dorsal stream difficulty in being able to reach for things, like where is it in space, and how can I use my vision and my reaching skills to find it. So just sometimes by color highlighting the edge, that helps them to know where they're supposed to grab, or in this case, where am I supposed to put? And when we think of visual guidance of your upper limbs, using your vision with your hands, it's both. It's putting things places and it's reaching to get things. So that don't forget the placement piece. I think sometimes in assessment people forget that placement piece. I want to just show you too how color is used in our world. This is my clicker at home, and I know where the on button is because it's color-coded. I know where the record button is because it's color-coded, because my brain does not want to look at all those black other colors to try to find something I want to do immediately. So our world is color-coded to match our visual system. Same thing when we go to the airport. We've got color coding on these kinds of visual systems that are shown to us. Color is important, color coding is important. How about if the Boston subway system was shown to you in a map, but all the train paths were in black and white? You'd have to stand there forever to figure that map out. But knowing the red line, you follow the red line. Knowing the green line, you follow the green line. So I just want to make that point that we're all color coding in our lives. Our kids with CVI just have to do it more effectively. So this was a strategy. A kid couldn't figure out, where am I supposed to put my foot here to get up on this stool? And just by putting a little colored target, that helped them know, oh, that's where you want me to put my foot. Think about this on a communication device. The one on the left-hand side is a backpack. The one on the right-hand side is a coat. We would not want those next to each other on a communication device. We would not want both those to be used in the same learning activity, because that would interrupt the child's color coding and interrupt their shape coding, because they look really alike. We can look at those, shift our gaze to the elements, look long enough, and we have enough visual library to figure out this highly symbolic thing is a backpack, and this highly symbolic thing is a jacket. But our kids with CVI may not. Again, this is just some organizational systems in your home to help your child be more independent by color. Form accessibility is Form accessibility is also something that we look very careful at. That's what learning materials are best for your child. Most of the learning materials in a school are black and white and symbolic. That's what most worksheets are for children in school, again, because they have very, very good libraries. That matches that child's, most children in a first grade class or second grade class, that material matches their visual system. It will not match most of our kids with CVI's visual system for this form accessibility. Some children with CVI have no attention to pictures at all. They don't look at pictures at all. And if they look at pictures, they don't do that shift of gaze that you all had to do when I showed you that very complex, those complex images. So they may be at the level that they need a real item that's three-dimensional that they can pick up and smell and turn around in their hands in order to understand that learning material, like a manipulative, for instance. That may be the level they're at. If they are able to use pictures, what kind of pictures? That's what we dig into there. Do they need photographs of real items? Do they need drawings that are pretty realistic? Do they need color or not? And Matt Tejan's image assessment is a really good assessment to help figure out which form this is for a child, and we use that all the time. But you can see that we can make adaptations too by doing that assessment with the frog, you know, the pink frog and the green bird. We can really understand whether or not that child understands highly symbolic images also by using their favorite things. So if we know a child likes Harry Potter, we might show them a real picture of Harry Potter and they say, yo, that's Harry Potter. Again, I love Google. You can put in black and white picture of Harry Potter, and do they understand that? How about if I make Harry Potter kind of cartoon-like, and again, that's on Google, can they still identify it as Harry Potter or not? So that would just be, again, an assessment. So we want to identify, too, this accessibility of multicolored items and just understand when we think of form, just because they looked at the picture does not mean they understood what was on that picture. We have to be very careful about that. And when children do begin to be able to go to flat images for their understanding, it may just be that one thing that they understand. We don't want teams to say, oh, they understand that, so let's make everything like that, until we very carefully assess what those levels are. And that's where your TVI is going to be very, very important. So we want to use the right form for that child in school, whether it's three-dimensional, whether it's real photographs, whether it's realistic color drawings, but we want to avoid this black and white color drawings, which is mostly what school materials are made out of. Pre-made materials are mostly black and white. So this would be kind of the progression, I think, of kids with CVI when we're trying to get them to go flat. So if I know the child understands that this is their fan, I might put it on a piece of black cardboard that's 5 by 7. Just glue that thing right on there. Can they still understand it there? And then I would take a picture of this to make a two-dimensional image of that. And can they still make that visual leap to understanding what that is? So that would be kind of a progression of my assessment to figure out that. Think about this too. Does this child understand these spray bottles? If you're using the spray bottle for some activity, do they understand that spray bottles come in all different sizes and shapes? That's instruction that needs to happen. But if I go very cartoon-like, can they still understand it? How about black and white? Can they still understand? They're looking at it. Again, you guys do this all smoothly and easily, right? Because you have these rich and full visual libraries. And again, if the child recognizes this three-dimensional image of a spray bottle, that's what goes on the picture, because that's not a big visual leap for that child. And also understanding the limits of that. If a child can understand some symbolic things, now we've got clutter. Can they still do it when you've got this whole mess of color? We just can't take that for granted. So here in Matt Tejan's image assessment, the child was able to identify this image as a bird, but that doesn't mean they could use it in a testing material for birds. Just because this one image with no clutter was recognized, not necessarily true. So clutter always has to be compensated for. And certainly, you see that this communication device image is very cluttered and highly symbolic. And the child is really going to struggle with color coding because you've taken away most colors here for the child. I mean, most things here are like reds, and they're not separated enough by color. You've got too many yellow things next to each other. So you have to really think about all these things when we think about that. Perspectives really matter. Again, think about your lobster when you were looking down, even though you can understand, let's see if I have my, if I hold my phone like this, you know it's my iPhone. If I hold it like this, it's still my iPhone. If I hold it like that, and those are all different visual images that you have, right? And we just want to make sure that we understand visual images. A child that has the ability to play with things themselves, I mean, watch a little baby with typical vision. They pick things up, they turn it around, they put it in their mouth, but every time they turn it around, they're creating more and more visual memories about perspectives. If your child doesn't have that ability to play by themselves, we want to foster that different perspectives, looking at toys and items in different perspectives, supported by an adult. Visual guidance with upper limbs means reaching for things or placing things and looking while you're playing. So when we think about vision, whenever I reach for things in my environment, before I even touch it, my hand becomes the right shape in order to get that. So I'm going to have a C shape in order to grab that water bottle. If I'm going to pick up the nail polish, I'm going to use 2 fingers. If I'm going to pick up a paper clip, it's going to be 2 fingers. Your brain already knows about the size, the location, and all of that. With kids with CVI, we see things like when they reach, they come from the top and then they put their hands down. It's like they do this sweeping. They don't really know where it is in space. So let me come at it from the side, or let me come at it from the top to feel what it is. So watch your child's hand shape. That will give you a lot of information about what they see and how much they know about what's in the environment. So just watching the reaching is really, really important. You see that they understand where it is, the hand shape that's needed, the size that's needed, just by their visual systems. So what do? We're going to encourage this tactile learning and using tactile methods. The fact that they come from the top to find something is terrific. The fact that they come from the side is terrific. Remember we said placing was also an issue for these kids? So if they can't place an item on the table, they keep missing the table, teach them to use their other hand to find the table and then put the cup down. So use those tactile skills as much as possible. We had the color highlighting is going to be very important, and places to grab. And then back to clutter and spacing. You're going to think about that. So this was a child who couldn't figure out how to get out of the classroom. We wanted her to go to the bathroom independently. Just by putting a little colored marker on the door handle, she was able to find it, first of all, and then reach and grab it and get out of the classroom by herself to go to the bathroom. These color highlighting was on 2 lunch boxes because the child kept hitting the middle of the lunchbox and knocking it over and getting very frustrated with, I can't pick this thing up. By just color highlighting the handle, she understood this is where I'm supposed to grab. This color's helping me figure out where I'm going to grab. We did this in assessment where we gave a child one of these folders where it has a little slit and you slide your paper in. And the child just was jamming this paper in because they couldn't figure out in space where to put it. And just by a little color highlighting, they could figure that out. This was a child who was not putting their cup back on the table and not finding their cup. So we put a little red marker on the tray, and we never presented the child with their drink in midair. We always put it on that red thing and said, get your cup. Because we wanted her to find it, drink it, and return it there. If you present a cup to a child with a visual impairment of any kind in midair, that's where it's going back, boom, dropped. And I'm sure you see that, right? I'm going to return it to where it is. And just by having that color marker really helped in that situation. Visual guidance of lower limbs is like your visual guidance of upper limbs, but it's how do I use my vision and my feet? How do I know where I'm supposed to step? So we want to take a look at how they step accurately. Do they put their foot on a stair in the middle, or are they kind of off to the side of that stair? Do they rely heavily on running their heel down the riser of the stair to tactily feel where that stair is? When they get to the top, do they try to take another step? Or if they get to the bottom, do they feel a little surprised they got to the bottom? Or they try to take another step? We want to take a look at all of that. We also want to take a look at, can they put their foot in a shoe? Something that's I'm going to use my eyes and my vision to find where my foot is supposed to go. So we want to, again, support that tactile learning. A cane is a really, really important part of navigation for kids with CVI because of those lower visual field problems and their problems with visual guidance of lower limbs. So really get an evaluation for a cane. The cane also has the tremendous benefit of identifying your child as having a visual impairment. So some of the things that they do will be better accepted by the community because people will understand they're visually impaired. I had a parent that told me that their child is touching everything in a store, and the worker would come over and say, you can't touch that. You got to tell him he can't touch all that stuff. If that boy comes in with a cane, all of a sudden touching stuff is okay. You know? So again, it's just a little bit of a marker for the community that your child has a visual impairment. So here's just some highlighting on the edge of a stair or on a sort of obstacle course with alternating color. Again, you see that step up here or step down here. Access to people is one area that children really struggle with because faces change all the time. People get haircuts, people wear hats, people change their glasses, people's heads are constantly moving in different perspectives, people make noise. So often facial recognition is a real problem for kids with CVI. It's really going to interrupt their social skills. And I think it's a little heartbreaking sometimes when I say to parents, I don't think your child understands you visually, but that doesn't mean they don't understand who you are. They understand your voice, they understand your smell, they understand where you're supposed to be in the environment, and all those are actually harder than visual recognition. So it's not that they don't recognize you, it's the visual piece of the recognition that's important to remember. So I worked with a child who every time someone came in the classroom, he would make a fresh comment like, oh, here comes trouble. And then whoever entered the classroom would say, you know, Billy, you shouldn't be saying stuff like that, or that's inappropriate. Billy just got his job done, which was, I don't know who that person is. I'm gonna be fresh, and he's gonna use his voice, and now I'll know who he is. So it was working pretty well for Billy until we kind of redirected the staff actually into naming themselves when they came in the room, because Billy was trying to figure out who you were. Sitting down at a snack table, who's at the table? Can your child advocate for themselves by saying, hi, I'm so-and-so, who's at the table with me here? Like, that's self-advocacy for a kid, or you do it as an adult. Again, color coding for recognizing people, motion for recognizing people, clothing, glasses, beards, all of these. I talked about this already with the redheads. We had a child who went off to a work experience where everybody wore a uniform, and now that child really struggled to try to figure out who people were because everybody was in the same colored shirt. So what do? You introduce yourself, you narrate who's present, you describe the features of yourself. So I'll walk down the hall and say, you know, hi Aiden, it's Ellen, I have glasses. And it's my quick little thing as I go by Aiden to help him visually recognize me. I also want to make sure that I call the child's name. So I'm looking at April right now. She's getting a little bit nervous because she's like, oh my gosh, Ellen's going to ask me a question here. My eye contact with April is giving her that visual cue. All the rest of you could be asleep. Rachel's not asleep. I'm sorry, you're not asleep because she's expecting me to talk to her. So when we think about access to people, we want to say Johnny before we ask a question or deliver a message to Johnny, because he doesn't have what April and I have as far as cues here. So that's another really important thing here. We never want people to say, oh, you know who I am, guess again. Like, that would be, like, why are you doing that? And you see people do it all the time because he's looking at you. And they think that they should be able to recognize because they're looking. That recognition piece is really, really hard. Don't let people do that to your kid. They can't do it. And so they're just going to start guessing. That's uncomfortable. I wouldn't like it. And don't use photographs of people in learning. So if you think about, if you're not looking at faces, you're not building that visual library of features of people to recognize them, why would you use an image on a flat background? That's a huge visual leap when you have no library of faces. Impact of light, that can be over attention to light, like staring at light. That can be that they can work better on backlighting. It can also be light sensitivities, that they really struggle with light. They may go to the classroom door and stop because the light outside is different. And they have to stand at that threshold for a minute to let themselves accommodate for going outside, or vice versa. And so it looks like a behavior. And people are like, you know, or to you at your home, let's go. Why aren't we going out the door? That stopping is an adjustment for them. And we have to understand that that's an adjustment for them. Kids will often have two reactions to different light levels. So they'll put a toy with light right up to their eyes and not seem to have any problem. But then when they go outside in the sunlight to a different spectrum of light, they're really light sensitive. So that's another thing that we take a look at. So we want to avoid light sources if it's distracting their visual skills. Use backlighting as we need it. Use shades, positioning, just position them away from the windows or away from the overhead light. Use tinted glasses or a bill on the cap. And as I said, positioning. Response interval is just a delay. Think about it as a delay for looking and a delay for recognition. Again, when they look, don't take it away. They need that extra time. So I'm just giving you extra time. Impact of motion is huge. Kids need motion in order to see sometimes, but they also have impaired perception of motion, meaning they can't understand distance, direction, or speed. That's going to be a real problem crossing streets and something your orientation and mobility person needs to be. I'm going to give you this, that's an adult with CVI talking about motion. Those are just some suggestions. Sensory integration is children have a hard time doing two things at once. Hearing something and looking, touching something and looking, being touched and looking, being moved and looking. So we want to make sure that we understand what those parameters are, but we want multisensory learning, so we know kids need that auditory input, but separate it from the vision. So on the IEP, I might say this child needs multisensory learning with one sense challenged at a time, which is going to be an extended learning experience. That's just an adult with CVI that I'll give you. This PowerPoint is available. Visual curiosity, walking your child into a room, where do they pay attention? Do they pay attention to everything in the room? Do they only pay attention to the left side or the right side? Do they seem to walk through the environment or only see things at 2 feet or 3 feet? This is all visual curiosity. A child with typical vision is going to walk in and look everywhere in the room, and we need to know how much that child is looking. Why is this important? This curiosity is the basis of all learning that happens without us. So my mother never needed to teach me to make a bed because I saw her make millions of beds. And I tried it myself one day because I had that visual access to that. Children with CVI or children with impairments may need direct instruction on those things because they can't learn through that imitation, that incidental learning. That's just about incidental learning. Compensatory skills, I think we talked about. It's all the other senses. It's also this prediction and memory, it's context, and I think we've made it pretty clear that color coding is really important. Here's an image of a very cluttered background. Raise your hand as soon as you find the toothbrush. Good, 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 good. Okay, did anybody see this toothbrush? No. Why? You didn't need to. You didn't need to. You went to prediction. It's not going to be on the floor, hopefully. Not going to be in the toilet, like Jerry Seinfeld. It's going to be on the counter. That's the first place you looked. This is why prediction is so important for you and I, and so important for our kids with CVI. It's an attention thing. So put things in standardized places for kids. So even kids in wheelchairs that don't navigate by themselves, wheel them over to the storage space, wherever you're getting the materials, wherever you're getting the food, the snack. Show them where it is, have them bring it back, eat it, and then return materials back to the same place or return them to the garbage can. This is all going to be really important part of prediction. This is just color coding. I won't go through that. So when we think about all the things we need to worry about for kids, it's presentation methods, it's access to people, it's what materials we use, what the learning environment looks like, what kind of support staff you need in your schools, and how much direct teaching do you need to do because they're missing information. So again, I'll give you that making the bed. Children, on a cognitive test, a little one may look as if they have a cognitive problem because one of the questions is, does the child pretend play? Because that's a cognitive skill that's typical of a preschooler, right? But how can a child with CVI pretend play cooking in a kitchen if they've never seen that, cooking in the kitchen? So again, we have to make sure that we understand what's been missing from this child's life and then fill in those blanks. These are, I'm just going to scoot through this. I talked about that already. So these are just some further resources. CVI Now is our Facebook page, our information page, our website. Go there for lots and lots of information about CVI, and it's all been vetted with researchers, and it has research behind it. We have posted the research when we have it. For parents is a Facebook page. It's only for you. There's no professionals involved in that, just so you can have private discussions. And our evaluations are here at Perkins, and we do those. You can get on the list for an evaluation if you don't have a TVI. We could support your team just in understanding, because you're going to need a team to serve your child, and a special educator needs the information, an OT, a PT, a speech and language. Everybody benefits from the CVI information. So I went a couple minutes over. I apologize. I hope you're not last in line for lunch now. You can blame me. But thanks so much, everybody.